is a very troubling time here on the Suncoast as red tide continues to take over and drastically impact our air quality and our coastline. Most of us feel helpless as we watch our marine life suffer, but there are some things we can do to help prevent this from happening in the future. And it actually starts with our planting habits. Alex Barth from Troy's Tropics is here to explain. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, how you doing?
Great, thank you. So we are learning that red tide is actually caused by algae blooms. What causes the algae blooms?
So essentially it's excess nutrients. Now red tide itself is a naturally occurring phenomenon, but the problem can be increased by excess nutrients. A real simple way to look at it, algae loves feeding on nutrients, and if there is an abundance of nutrients from artificial sources or sources that aren't from nature, then it increases, and you end up with the situation that we have now.
Okay, and now you say that this can happen in fresh water as well.
It can. That green kind of bluish algae we're all experiencing down in Cape Coral, it's been real bad. In fresh waterways, it's been bad. That's another. The main reason is excess nutrients leaching out into the waterways. The algae is just predominantly worse than it ever has, exponentially worse.
Wow. It's like we're fertilizing it.
We are basically feeding it. I mean, algae's been around a long time. It loves nutrients.
Wow. So there's two questions I think a lot of us have. And the first is, how does it affect our own home landscaping and gardening? And then the other is, how does our landscaping contribute to the algae blooms?
Well, obviously, it can be a huge economic impact. But I think as residents, sometimes we feel helpless with these problems. And we ask ourselves, what can we do to make a difference? The fact of the matter is, as homeowners, as gardeners, as people that have landscaping, there's a lot you can do right in your own backyard to make a huge difference.
Oh, great. So you have some recommendations for us, and the first involves what you have brought for us in front.
Yeah, correct. So I just brought a palette of native plants. The first one with the pink bloom is going to be salvia. It's a native plant. Here's the thing about native plants, they don't need excess fertilizers, and they grow great with less water, less fertilizer. So you have the salvia, and then followed by the perennial peanut. It's a ground cover, could be a good replacement for grass. Grass takes a ton of nutrients, perennial peanut does not.
So taking time to learn what the native plants are and letting them, that's what we should be choosing if we want to minimize them.
Exactly. And mimosa with the pink puff bloom, that's another great one. It's a ground cover as well. And then we have palms.
Mimosa has the little, like I call it the Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, exactly. It looks really cool. And then you have things like Kunti palm, which is like a dwarf palm, essentially been around for thousands, if not millions of years. I mean, it's a great, easy to take care of plant. And then firebush, which is a butterfly attractant, hummingbird attractant. It's just a wonderful plant that produces blooms to have in the yard and low requirements as far as excess nutrients.
Is that the red and orange that we
That's
see right
correct.
there?
That's pretty.
And these are beautiful. So when you think native plants, you don't have to pick boring, ugly plants for your yard.
Exactly. And then we have like a thatch palm, for instance. Thatch palms are hardy. They have elevation to them. They can grow 8 to 10 feet or so and look wonderful in the landscape.
There are quite a few choices, and I imagine there are more native plants than this to choose from.
There's a whole array of native plants. People don't realize that they could have such an easy to take care of yard if they start to empower themselves and look at options and talk to the professionals about native planting.
Is it worth taking out things in our yard that are not native?
Well, it depends on your conscience, I suppose. So if you want to make a difference, of course it would. Here's the thing. Planting native plants use less water, which in turn leaches less nutrients and fertilizer into the ground, and then overall you need less fertilizer.
Okay. You have some other tips as well. What about our fertilizer choices?
Okay, so fertilizer, it's always important. In the big box stores, you'll see this blue powder stuff. I don't want to name it. I don't want to be like that, but the key is to use time-release granular fertilizer. And don't overuse it, just throw it like chicken feed in the garden. Time release, long-term release fertilizer is much less devastating as far as leaching and running off into our waterways and making algae problems worse.
Wow. I mean, it is so interesting to find out that a difference can be made literally at your home.
Oh,
Yes.
most definitely.
And your house will look better because it will last.
And your house will look better. A lot of those instant release fertilizers make the plants look good for a few weeks and then they go into decline.
Oh. All right, and what about, there's some other tricks of the trade like rain sensors.
Yeah, if you have an irrigation system, the great way to kind of prevent excess leaching is to install a rain sensor. They're cheap. You can ask your local irrigation expert to install one, and it'll shut down the system every time it rains.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than driving in a rainstorm and seeing all the sprinklers
Oh, I
going.
know. It's troubling. And at the same time, you save money on your water. So you save money, and then you're helping the environment at the same time.
I mean, there's really no arguing with that.
There really isn't.
So I do want to ask you, you know, if we look out on our yard and maybe we're looking for warning signs, if we are kind of putting too many nutrients, is there anything that we can see that would tell us that some of our landscaping is doing that?
There's no real warning signs, but there is things we can do to prevent these things. Like, for example, mulching. If your beds are looking sandy and it doesn't look like it has much mulch, it's time to mulch. Mulch will keep in the nutrients, it'll keep in the water, you'll need less water, less nutrients. And remember, nutrients feeds these algae. It's like steroids for them.
Oh, I'm going to get some.
So
steroids
more
for
is
that
not
mulch.
always better,
I'll get
which I think we're
mulch.
learning in lots of ways.
Exactly. And then the last thing as far as soil is you amend the soil. So we have a really sandy substrate soil here in South Florida. And if you amend the soil with compost, manure, things like that, it'll really hold in the nutrients. And compost obviously is a nutrient itself. So-
Great information. Thank you so much, and especially at a
welcome.
time where I know a lot of us feel helpless, there are
Yes.
things that we can do. For more information about all types of plants, you can find out about the native plants. Any questions you have, you can find Alex at Troy's Tropics on Proctor Road. You can also visit them online, troystropics.com.